In this video, we would like to discuss objectives and methodologies of case studies. As you might remember, within the training curricula, we used a lot of case studies to illustrate certain cases in the field of cluster and innovation. And this video should show you what is the methodology behind. Before we go into details, we should keep in mind there are different purposes of case studies, which are shown here. Number 1 and number 3 have been used most frequently. You can see number 1 is a case study intended to illustrate a very specific case. Show the problem, show the solution, and might be the impact. Another very interesting kind of case study is number 3, cumulative case studies. That means there are a lot of similar cases and we put them together in order to draw joint conclusions and interesting findings. So these are the both case studies which are used more often. They are also an exploratory case study and very rare but very good also the critical incident case study, where we will look for one particular issue and try to solve this issue or find questions with regard to this specific problem. So regardless what kind of case study methodology we use, we recommend, and it's also useful practice, to use the same structure for all the case studies. That is very important also for the teacher in order to present interesting case studies, but also for the trainees to really have some valuable learnings. And here we can see the typical structure. Mainly 5 points. It has to be short and precise. At the beginning, the introduction. Each case study is different, but we would like the trainees to introduce what is this case all about. This can be short, it can be a bit more extensive, but it has to give the trainees the possibility to understand in what framework this case study will be taught. After the introduction, the case study should contain what is the current situation, especially when the problem or the case or the challenge began. It is advisable, since case studies can be in very different fields, also to include a glossary, a very short one, to make sure that we have all the same understanding. What is the cluster initiative? What is a cluster? So that should be advisable as well. So situation should focus on what was the situation when the case study or the problem raised, which also leads us to the third point, the problem, the challenge. This has to be very precise and not very detailed, but very precise and very clearly mentioned, because that gives the trainees the key objective, what they have to look for. So that is sometimes a challenge when it comes to case studies, but here the problem has to be precisely mentioned. This also helps us to deduct the questions which should be solved in the frame of the case study. So that is everything what the trainees should become before they start finding solutions or discussing what could have been an interesting solution. So after this has been taught, it might make sense that the trainees will come up with ideas how they believe this specific challenge or the problem has been solved. And then it's up to us, who are the owner from the case study, to present the solution and in the end also the result. Not only the solution how something happened, but also the results are important to see, okay, what was the impact of this certain kind of solution. In order to show you a bit more detailed how it should look like, let us take one case. It's the case of firm-level innovation promotion in Germany to illustrate how it could look like. The introduction. Here it is a case which happened around 2008, where companies before the financial crisis were very active. Innovation is one of the key drivers in Germany, and supporting innovation in companies is one of the key activities. So this case study focuses a bit on how companies can be supported to innovate as a general introduction. Now the situation at the beginning, bit more detailed. It was 2008 when the financial crisis came, when companies were very hardly hit. And of course, in such kind of crisis, you cut very easily investments for R&D and for innovation. So the situation was that in that case that companies start struggling and wanted to stop innovation and R&D. But that was exactly what German government didn't want. So we move now to the problem, the challenge. The challenge was how companies could be motivated not to fire the researchers, not to stop innovate despite of the time of the crisis. So that was basically the contradictory situation that on one side the German government considered it is still important to innovate, and you can imagine if you even innovate in times of crisis, these companies can go out of the crisis much faster with innovative solutions than others. So that was the problem, the challenge, and at that moment it makes sense to stop and to ask the trainees what kind of solution could have been implemented by the German government to avoid that companies stop to innovate, that companies stop setting out and pushing out researchers and innovation managers. As a trainer, you can now motivate the trainees to come up with interesting ideas. It can last half an hour or 1 hour. After that, it might make sense to ask the trainees what kind of solutions they created, but then we also have to demonstrate what was the reality. Sometimes it might even be that the trainees come up with better ideas. So in brief, because this case will be taught and we have prepared all the training documents, here was a solution. The German government set up a specific innovation support program which facilitated and de-risks investments in innovations, so they provided grants for companies which were interested to even continue to innovate in times of crisis. By doing so, it was possible to avoid that researchers, innovation managers were fired. And here in this case study, in the end, we will present some very good impact and results to show that this was gave a big boost to companies, that they came out much faster, much stronger out of the crisis than before. But more details, again, will be done in the case studies. Thanks for listening.